Hi, everyone, and welcome to One Voice Evolving, where we reclaim joy in DEI spaces. I am your host, Kim Brasser, and in this special edition, we are honored to have the esteemed Dr. Nikki Lanier, who embodies our intent to bring you voices that are raw, real, and relatable, and able to shift the conversation from head to heart for white women. Dr. Nikki Lanier is all that and so much more. With over 25 years of career achievements and higher education, her company, Harper Slade, is one of the fastest growing and most highly recognized racial equity advisory firms in the country. Nikki has also founded 2 global coaching programs, one for inclined white women, which I participate in, who want to become better racial equity advocates in their homes, workplaces, and communities. And the other is a coaching program for professional Black women who are in need of ripening and respite. I know you'll enjoy hearing from this keynote queen, lover of grace and kindness, as she focuses on the stabilization of our economy by helping to create a world where racial equity thrives. Enjoy, like, comment, and share, and be sure to visit our website for additional resources in your journey. So grateful to have you here. I was just sharing that you did a TikTok last week on grace over gotchas. And I wonder if you would just expand on that a little more and tell us whatever you think we need to know other than what's on your bio, because I've already shared all that.
Yeah, well, first of all, Kim, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm so excited about being here, talking with your audience, but I'm so excited to watch what you are birthing in your own racial equity work and your own racial equity advocacy. So I'm just so honored and humbled to know that you are igniting your own flame in this space and that you're using platforms like this to assure that it's like kind of, out in the ether as broadly as possible. So my work is centered around race and equity. I do it in a multitude of settings and workplaces and kind of private coaching and events, lots of ways that I try to promulgate this doctrine of multiculturalism and the urgency of assuring the accelerated advancement of Black and Brown people as an economic imperative. That work falls inside of the DEI ecosystem, even though it's not necessarily DEI. It's more just like we have to figure out racism, and that's probably even harder, a harder nut to crack than DEI. But I've also found that, in the last several years that people like me have been practicing in this space, there does seem to be this emergence of unkind, inartful, misaligned messaging in the name of advancing multiculturalism, in the name of advancing racial equity, that we are just being mean and unkind and clapping back and, wordsmithing and making sure it's the right way to say everything. And I think at the expense of the doctrine and at the expense of the preservation of dignity and the understanding human frailties, and that, listen, on this topic, we are all fragile. Let's be honest. All of us are fragile and all of us are ridiculously emotional. And so we just have to understand that we are dealing with human beings. And on this topic in particular, we really have to be careful with one another. If your outcome is to really soften hearts and to change minds and to introduce new norms and to help people think about new ways of mental mapping people who are different, if you're inviting into a new space of thinking, then your outcome, then your strategy can't be yelling at folks and, and just making people feel bad for who they are and condemnation and sweeping indictments. And so, my value in our company is grace. I talk a lot about the importance of grace. And so grace must prevail over this gotcha culture.
And so certainly you've been in enough spaces where, particularly social media, where you can be anonymously gotcha. I mean, it's almost like an art form in itself sometimes. And how do you How do you persuade someone out of that and into a graceful place to have a dialogue?
I think you, in the same way you persuade anyone. I mean, part of it is what you do. So I tend to ask a lot of questions, and oftentimes asking questions is a really great way to pull out of people an invitation to be introspective. Right. So if I'm asking you, did you really mean it that way? Or did you want to come off in a way that felt like you were being overly critical or criticizing? Did you mean to say these words? Did you want to assure that this person was going to, kind of be alienated from this doctor? Like, what are you doing? So sometimes I ask questions to compel reflection, hopefully. But I think more importantly, my style, my demeanor, my persona, my posture is one that desperately wants to connect on a topic that is so incredibly difficult to talk about. And so I think I work a lot, Kim, on my how I show up, how I use my body, what language I use, how I position, like my eye contact. And so it's important to me that on this topic in particular, people see me as visible and vulnerable, honest and careful. And so that in and of itself invites an exhale. And inside of that exhale, in my opinion, is where magical things can happen around unpacking narratives and presumptions and belief systems. And all of that is very intriguing to me. And so I think that's part of what we have to learn as women, as people who are doing this work well, is really being thoughtful about our own attributes coming into the work so that we're not contravening the work, we're helping to further it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. So when you are face to face or doing a live group, and you've got one coming up in Denver, June 14th, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, I met you in Louisville a few months ago when you did your live event there, the RAARE Woman Collective Live, and now that you've taken it on the road.
Yes.
And so when you go into those, if someone were to come into that event, what can they expect to find in a 3-hour session with you?
Yeah. So first of all, the RAARE Woman Collective, there is nothing like this on the planet, nothing like this. And I'm not saying it in a self-serving way. Oh, maybe I am, but I'm just so proud of it. I'm so proud of it, Kim, because listen, the RAARE Woman Collective is a program suite designed to help, support, encourage, undergird, in some ways even protect white women as you are deployed to do the work of advancing racial equity well, right? Preserving relationships and not eviscerating them, and really moving the needle to change hearts and minds or soften hearts and minds on this calcified issue of racism. So RAARE on the Road is a 3-hour workshop, and we delve into why we have to really think about racial equity in the context of economics, which is, part of my background in working for the Federal Reserve. So when we look at the demographic trends and we look at what's happening economically for our country, because Black and Brown people have not been able to play fully in the economy. So I want to give white women the context in which to sit their racial equity work outside of social justice, outside of moral imperative, outside of right thing to do. How do they give context to this in a way that can get into the hearing of the people that they're going to be speaking with? I also want to teach, and this will be part of what we'll talk about in Denver and all of our RAARE events, talk about what are the attributes that are important for us to embody. I talked about them a little bit earlier. Things like kindness and sincerity and authenticity and self-awareness and self-control. Understanding your audience, being a student of your audience, and really thinking about outcomes. So this work is not for folks that just want to be led by anger, because you do more harm than good in this space. So if you want to be led by anger and have no ability to manage and control your anger, then the RAARE Woman Collective is probably not for you. And so we talk about that. So we talk about those attributes. And then we also talk about the importance of thinking about this work as a movement, and how to solidly lock ourselves into a movement leveraging 3 Ps. The first is the power that all women have, and like just kind of how we sit in powerful roles, influencing policy, influencing corporation structures, influencing strategy. Like we are in highly influential roles evermore. And so that can be leveraged with a lens toward racial equity. So too can our position, the second P, as women. We are wives and mothers and sisters and daughters and aunties, and all of that has a different seat from which we influence very naturally. But what we also talk about is like what white women have that I will never have is proximity to white men who on the topic of racial equity really must be moved. And as good as I'd like to think that I am in this space, there's no way I can get into your husband's hearing on this topic or someone else's father or mother-in-law or grandma. I can't just show up at your family reunion espousing the benefits of racial equity in a way that you could, but I can teach you how to do it. And so there's something about the trust that comes with that proximity that allows you to get into that hearing in ways that I can't. So those are some of the attributes and some of the things and the promises, if you will, and the outcomes that we talk about in the RAARE Woman Collective body of work in general and the RAARE on the Road specifically.
You know, Nikki, one of the things we do is kind of pull back the curtain and talk about, and then there's this part of it. And
Yeah.
I'm curious about, as you decided to begin to engage with white women to help them lead in this way, what kind of internal conflict did you experience? I can only assume you did because we're all
Yeah.
steeping in the same tea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, well, first of all, everything that I talked about in terms of these attributes, managing anger is, let me start there, is something that I have to work on constantly, and fear. So I'd say anger and fear that I've held most of my life for white people in general, not necessarily white women. And it wasn't necessarily birthed from like lessons or express lessons taught by my parents. It wasn't birthed from that. But it was just kind of living life as a Black woman, corporately and otherwise. You get burned a lot. You get frustrated a lot by what's happening through white culture to Black and brown people. And I'm not unscathed from that. I mean, I experience racism daily. I experience inequity. I'm still, swimming in the vicissitudes of racial inequity like any other Black and brown person. And so there's a lot of that I really had to put on the table. I had to like say it to myself that I'm angry and I'm frustrated with, and I have sadness about, and I'm fearful of, and none of those go away, if I'm honest. So even sitting here today, I'm still managing all of those emotions just because they fed 50 something years of my life. But they don't serve me in my work. And so that's something else that I had to really also understand. So that means that if this is to be my work, which I believe it will be until I draw my last breath, I see this work as ministry and I'm honored to do it. I believe that God has instructed me to be in this place. So that means I have to be a wise steward over this doctrine, and that my flesh can't contravene the work ahead. So I gotta work on that. And one of my good friends who that we do this work together, her name is Karen Smith. She's a coach with the RAARE Woman Collective, and she's a really good thought partner and accountability partner to really help me assess and reflect when and where I'm showing up in ways that could compromise the work that I'm doing, because I'm not dealing with, some of the frustrations and anger and fears that I might have.
So we had your director on here just a few days ago, and she touched on things like the conversation cards or the kind of support that the RAARE Woman Collective is becoming for white women particularly. And I'm just wondering how, and I saw that you're doing things for professional Black women who need respite, and what was the word you used? It was another R word.
Ripening and respite, yeah.
Ripening. So tell me a little bit about both of those, because we have both of those in our audience.
Yes, yeah.
So tell me about ripening and tell me more.
Yeah, ripening. Okay, so here's, let me let me answer your question by not answering it first. So when you think about, I think about like a triangle. So at the top of the triangle for me in my head is what's going to be true in 2045.
Okay,
And
good.
what we know will be true in 2045 is that Black people and Hispanic people will be the demographic majority in the US. And most of us know that, but we don't do and so therefore what? Conversation. We don't go to that part. So I do. I'm like, oh my gosh. So that means because I know of the work of the Fed and economics and such, whoever is in the majority of a citizen body really must be fairly economically fluid in that country without artificially imposed impediments like racism, right? And so what I know is that racism is a threat to the American economy because of the demographic trend. So by 2045, when Black people and Hispanic people will be the majority, there has to be a very different active economic reality. More Black people need to be in the middle class and above. More Hispanic people, households need to be in the middle class and above. Like that has to be true for our economy in order for the basics of our economy to work. The formulas that our economists use for monetary and fiscal policy all presume whoever's in the majority also can have fairly unfettered access to middle class attainment. And that's not true for Black and brown. Okay, so that's what's not answering your question. So to answer your question, so how I back into that is that if the top of the triangle is by 2045, we have to have more Black and brown economic mobility, then I want to help train this part of the triangle, white women, to leverage the fullness of their 3 Ps to help get racism out of the way. Because quite frankly, you're in a better position to do it than I am. Right? Because of that proximity. So you like, and it's a threat to you too, especially given the demographic trend. So it's a threat to white people too. And white women, I think because of our influence, because of your influence, because of your position, because of your power and your proximity, if trained well and supported and encouraged and equipped and supported, you could do that work to help eviscerate racism, get it out of here. Meanwhile, Black women leveraging their differently positioned 3 Ps, still power, still position, and the proximity to the family structure, to the community structure of Black people. Our role now then is to help get our families and our careers and the choices and decisions that we're making now almost into position so that when we become a part of the majority, we can in fact play well in the economy, that we are making the right choices and really thinking about our own preparation and thinking about how we're leaning into the way that we work our work and build our careers and build our companies and assure our children are prepared and that our families are ready for what will be coming, which has never happened in our country's history, is the becoming of to the majority. Like coming to majority is its own preparation ramp. And so I see white women as beautifully positioned to get rid of the impediment called racism, soften that or get rid of it. Black women to pull our families along to help assure the nation's economy, our households, our families flourish in this new normal. So 2045 makes for us a stable world, a stable economy, a stable United States. So ripening is about how are we ripening our mindsets and our understanding of the repositioning of the Black family in anticipation of 2045. And respite is the exhale. It is oftentimes when Black women are pulled into spaces to be given, to have conversations about what else needs to happen, how can we grow, how can we be developed. It's almost from the lens of you got to fix yourself. You're not palatable enough. You're broken in some way. You are not appealing in some way. So it's almost like whenever we're asked to like be corrective or correct, it is so that we can be more acceptable in dominant culture. This is a different kind of repositioning of ourselves, and it's not correction per se, it's redirection. But it allows us an opportunity to, inside of a community, kind of exhale as we're revamping the way that we're thinking about positioning ourselves and our families for 2045.
Awesome.
That was 3 hours of trying to get that answer out 4 days later.
So I'm going to talk about two things in the rest of our time. I'm going to talk about vision and I want to talk about resources.
Yes.
So let's start with vision. Without a vision, the people perish. You are the visionary. So you have a vision of a world in which racial equity, it thrives. That's
Yeah.
the word.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Because we have no experience of that.
Tell
For
me.
generations, we've never heard of such a thing, and we can't look at our world and see such a thing.
Anarchist. What are you talking about? So the mantra for the RAARE Woman Collective is creating a world where racism can't live. So it's not so much about creating a world without racism.
Huh?
It's that racism will probably exist in some way, but it's not being fed. It's not alive. It's not flourishing. It's not present in terms of how we discern mattering and human value. It's around here somewhere, but you got to seek it out, right? It's not just in your face and just kind of a part of the background of life's navigation. This is so funny. I'm so glad you asked me this, Kim, because I just did a post maybe yesterday on LinkedIn about finally being able to envision what that world would look like. And you know what I compared it to? Bridgerton on Netflix. I don't know if you've ever seen any of that.
I haven't, but now I have to watch it.
You got to watch it. And it's this incredible, beautiful society, of course, created by the ever formidable Shonda Rhimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so this incredibly elite, beautiful British society where Black and white and Asian and Hispanic and Asian Pacific Islander, like all in the same community. And there is no looking askance. There's no side eye. There's no presumption of better or worse that's race-based, right? And so there's lots of commingling of races at the grand balls, and there's just all kinds of multiculturalism on display. And there isn't even a hint of presumption of belonging outside of like, are you in the ton or not? Meaning like you have to have the upper class, whatever. But if you're in that class, you're in. So there's no more auditioning. Wow. There's no more auditioning. There's no more or mattering, right? So the value, your human value doesn't seem to be on trial and questioned at any given moment or in any given space. So it is hard to envision what we must strive for by 2045. And that's part of what I think makes it very difficult, is because what I'm asking people to help move us toward, or what people who do what I do, not just me, you do this too. What we're asking people to move toward is something that has never been seen in the history of the world. In the history of the world. And yet it must be, lest we be living inside of like something like an apartheid state, where the majority of your citizens just can't play well at all in the fundamentals of the economy, the fundamentals of the political systems, and the social structures of that country, because all of that control is still being held by the minority race. At that point will be white. And so that's called apartheid, right? And so I can picture that too. And so I know very clearly that I do not want that. So whatever the opposite of that is what we're striving toward.
Wonderful. Okay, so every time that I interview someone, they have wonderful resources at their disposal, things they think everybody should see, have, do, be, or read. And I will put those up on the website. I've got a resource page on our website after every interview. And so it will be under your name, your podcast, and then your resources. Give me three things that you think are critical learning or critical advancement. And I know that support in your mind is top tier.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about resources.
So one of the resources I'd say is a study that was promulgated by the Federal Reserve. I think it was 2021, and I can't remember the exact name of it, but the San Francisco Federal Reserve promulgated a study that basically outlined the cost of hate, the cost of marginalization based on race and ethnicity. And I think it was like $16 trillion in lost GDP over the last 20 years that's due exclusively to race-based inequity that our country is saddled with. So we could have said differently, we could have realized $16 trillion more in GDP had we finally realized a society that we're now all striving for, the dismantlement of racial inequity. So I would really encourage your readers to take a look at that study, and I'm happy to send that along to you, Kim, if you can't find it. I have it somewhere. Sure. The second is, and this is a little bit more broad, but I because racial equity, in my view, the way that we define it, is so dependent on understanding the structures, norms, policies, rules, and laws governing racial inequity, right? So the fact that it has, for most of our life together as humans in the United States, it's been illegal, sort of, to see Black and brown people as fully human. Right. But most people don't know that because nobody teaches that, right? We just don't teach it, or at least these several states don't want to teach it increasingly, or want to teach it intentionally wrong, which is nuts. Right. So just understanding the fundamentals of Black history, or white history, whatever you call it, the laws, rules, policy, norms, things like Black people were exempted from parts of the GI Bill, redlining, what are housing contracts, Social Security exemption for Black people, just understanding that this isn't about just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So we don't teach these laws that now give way to modern day race-based inequity residue. Then anytime we're talking about racial equity, we're talking about the dismantling of racism, or Black people need this, or brown people need that. It's easy to see that as they want something for nothing. They just need to pull themselves, make better choices, stop smoking crack. I don't know, whatever the stereotype is, but you don't know. So anyway, so I think whatever there's 13 laws that we teach inside of Harper Slade. You've learned those too with the RAARE Woman Collective, the same 13, but that's out of hundreds of laws. So it's important to find a way to study the laws, not just the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Work, but what laws were in place that required the marginalization of Black human beings. So that's super important. Did you ask me for 3? Because that's 2.
I did. That's 2. Yep.
Well, anything. So read. I'd say by resources, this podcast and other podcasts where we're talking about this, and the work that's birthed from the RAARE Woman Collective and the projects that come from the RAARE Woman Collective. Get involved in RAARE, that'd be wonderful, and or a similar program if you can find one. I don't know that there is one, but just make the decision to shift your mindset and have your new mindset reinforced with fair regularity, so that you can really authentically persist in your racial equity work, because we exist in a world where the momentum and the inertia will pull us out of it if we're not careful. Because of what we talked about at the top of the call. People are tired, people are beleaguered, people are frustrated, people are mad, and they're just like, screw it, I'm over it, I'm not doing any of it. But in order to stay the course, you really have to be focused and disciplined in your mindset. And so that's part of what the RAARE Woman Collective offers.
Well, and that's what the idea of conviction or ministry or purpose or passion is, a place for you to come back and center when you're tired and exhausted and beat down. Amen. To say, I have a bigger calling. There's a big reason I'm doing this, and that's your exhale.
That's your exhale.
That's your exhale.
That's right.
So I love it. So that's all of my questions for today, but I've loved having you. Is there any parting thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I just wanted to tell you again how proud I am of you and how excited I am to see this come to fruition. I know that you've been talking about this for a while, and that you have been about the business of advancing racial equity in various ways in your own way, Kim, for a long time. I'm just so happy to have you as a part of the collective, and you are an exemplar. And I'm just really excited about this. And I just pray that everything works out and that you're able to really see this expand, as I know is consistent with your vision.
Yeah, well, our vision.
That's right. That's right.
All right. You have a wonderful holiday weekend, Nikki, and I will see you in the RAARE Collective.
Yes, ma'am. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, hon.